All right, let's talk about the impeachment. So Donald Trump was acquitted. Surprise, surprise. Was anybody surprised about this? What I was surprised about was that 7 Republican senators actually voted to convict Donald Trump. I actually did not think it would even be 5. There were the original 5 senators, Republican senators, who voted that for the impeachment trial to continue on when Rand Paul forced the vote. And he said, hey, put your name down on the line right now. Who thinks this is constitutional? 5 of them said, yeah, we think this proceeding is constitutional. At that point, I didn't think all 5 would actually vote to convict. I think they were just assessing and saying it's constitutional. Whether or not he's guilty is a different question. Then later on, when that same exact question was forced on the entire Senate during the impeachment trial, 6 senators actually said, yes, we believe this is constitutional. 1 changed his mind and said, before I said no, but now that I'm hearing more of the arguments, I do think it's constitutional. And then finally, when it came to convict, 7, so they kept growing. The Democrats were able to grow their number from 5 to 6 to 7. They were able to win some over. So had they dragged on the impeachment hearing, I don't know, for another year, maybe they would have been able to slowly gain more and more senators to the point where they would have finally been able to convict Donald Trump. But what I find the most interesting about the impeachment hearing is, it is very clear to me that there was no direct evidence that Donald Trump incited the violence directly. And to me, the bar is very high because it is a question of freedom of speech and the right to peacefully assemble and the right to call for protests, the right to call for people to rise up, get angry, and make their voices heard. To me, it is that is such a fundamental issue that needs to be protected, a fundamental right that needs to be protected, that the bar for me is really high when you're going to say somebody is now responsible for the actions of other people simply because of something they said. The bar's got to be really high for me. So for me, Donald Trump did not incite the insurrection. He would have had to, in my mind, directly call for the storming of the Capitol, directly call for the violence. He would have had to have said, if they're not willing to listen to us, then go in there and force them to listen, right? It would have to be obvious and blatant. He would have to say, go in there and show up at their desk, rip the pens out of their hands, force them to make the right decision. That is what would have needed to be said in order for myself to say, yes, he incited an insurrection. He would have needed to call for the actual force rather than just saying, we're going to show up and we're going to make noise. That is what everybody does at every protest, and that is what we want the right to continue to do. But here's the thing. Congress doesn't want you to have that right. Congress actually wants you to have that. They want that right to be stripped from you, and there's a reason for this. Now, in normal times, I think they would have protected that right. And I think the ACLU would have absolutely been stronger on protecting it. But these days, what is going on is we are seeing a wave of unrest that has been going on for the last 4 or 5 years. There's been a wave of unrest, not only here in the United States, but across the Western world. Our political leaders know that people are out for them. They know that we are really close to reaching a failed state scenario where the rich are only getting richer, the poor are only getting poor, and people are becoming very, very frustrated. People are wanting change. Our political leaders know this. And like I said, it's not only those in the United States who know this, it's those all around Europe who are feeling this as well. We saw the Yellow Vest movement in France go for 18 months before conveniently the virus shut it down. These people that were in the streets creating, really just wreaking havoc on the place, burning things down, protesting, often violently, mostly peacefully. They were going for 18 months strong before they were told they had to go and shelter in place. We saw the same protests break out across Spain, all across in the UK. We saw Brexit and the rise of Boris Johnson. Here in the United States, the Democratic Party couldn't believe their eyes when Bernie Sanders actually became more popular than Hillary Clinton. And the Republicans certainly couldn't believe their eyes when Donald Trump actually won the primary. So we knew as there was this rise in this sentiment waving all across the Western world. We saw Bolsonaro in Brazil, Marine Le Pen in France, who, by the way, is more popular today than she was when she lost to Emmanuel Macron. So he has a run for his money coming up because Marine Le Pen has only grown in popularity. So these Western leaders know that things are not going so well. And people are very upset. And yes, people are blaming it in a variety of different places because the people don't fully understand. Not everybody fully understands exactly what is causing them this angst, what is causing them to feel like they've got a boot on their neck when it comes to their finances. People are feeling like they're just unable to live or achieve the dream, that they're instead a slave to the banks, a slave to their loans, and a slave to high costs of living. People are unable to start families. Right now, people are not starting families anymore. When people would start having babies in their early 20s are now not even contemplating babies until their late 30s or early 40s. So we're seeing this issue where people are unable to achieve the American dream or just even what the Western world promised. And so people are upset. People are angry. They're blaming it on racism, or they're blaming it on immigration, or they're blaming it wherever they're blaming it, right? They're placing all this blame. So the political leaders know that in times like these, the people always rise up against whoever's in charge. And in the past, there were monarchies that were toppled all across the Western world when people rose up against their monarchies and said, you're getting rich and we're not living a good life. And you keep getting wealthier and wealthier off of our tax dollars, and nothing's going on for us. Things are getting harder for us and worse for us. And we saw what happened to those monarchies all across the Western world. And so now we're at a point where the political leaders can see what is just right in front of them. The pitchforks are coming. The prime minister for Norway recently said, if you guys don't stop this lockdown, she warned the rest of Europe and said, if this continues, they're going to be out for us. They will not, the people will blame us, and they will ensure that a rise of populism waves through Europe and takes hold. Now, they use the term populism in a very negative way. They have a negative connotation to populism. Populism tends to have a negative connotation, but populism is actually very good. Populism is for the people. But nonetheless, they're talking about a maybe more toxic populism that might take hold all across Europe, one that they believe would be demonizing immigrants, demonizing others, one that is more bigoted, rooted in racism, right? That's what they're talking about, that there would be this wave that comes across. And maybe that would be true. But really, ultimately, what people are feeling is they're no longer satisfied with their government. And we have that going on here in the United States. We are no longer satisfied with our government. More and more people today would love to see a third party option. Problem is, it's not possible. The Constitution, the way our laws are written, the way that voting, the ballot access is written, I hate to break it to you, but a third party isn't possible right now. And if you think that the lawmakers are going to change the rules so that a third party can be possible, good luck. So our leaders know that people are unhappy. People want change. People feel like our political parties are corrupted. We don't trust our political leaders. We don't trust the voting systems, even though they want to try to say that, oh, well, obviously the election was fine. And but, you know, many people are, a third of Americans are still questioning it. Many Americans on the other side of the aisle question the Democratic primaries, both in 2016 and in 2020. People are losing trust in their politicians, in the system, in democracy here in the United States. People want radical change in one direction or the other. And it's creating division because of how radical people are wanting the changes to be. So these politicians know that they are in the crosshairs, that they are the ones that are ultimately, people will rise up and go after them. Now, they didn't mind when all across the country in the summer, they were not the ones that were targeted. No, instead it was mom and pop shops, and it was cities, and it was swaths of areas of downtown that were taken over, and it was police departments and city halls and CNN. And they didn't mind when it was unrest in the streets. When it wasn't affecting them directly, they didn't seem to mind it so much. In fact, they often encouraged it. But when it showed up at their workplace, when it showed up on their doorstep, suddenly it was, oh my gosh, we have domestic terrorism in our midst, and we have a real problem. Even though the damage of the Capitol building, I don't even know if we know how much that damage actually was, but we know the damage from this summer. The damage was $2 billion. It was the most amount of damage ever done for insurance claims. Insurance companies came out and said this was the most we've ever had to deal with as far as insurance claims went. It was $2 billion in damage across the summer, and dozens of people were killed. But that wasn't something that they focused on. Instead, they said, well, you know what? People are angry. What do you expect? People are angry. What do you expect? But then people show up at the Capitol and they don't say that. They don't say people are angry. What do you expect? You've lost the trust of the American people. Instead, they say, no, these are just QAnon conspiracy theorists. That's who these people are. And then I say, what's the difference between them and the people this summer? I mean, clearly people are just mad. And maybe they're mad about different things, but they're mad. And they're feeling like their government no longer works for them. Whether they think their government is racist or their government is crooked or their government is on the take. There's those of us who are anti-establishment. We believe our government is on the take. I believe the government is bought off and no longer working for the American people. So I don't trust my government anymore because I don't think that they're working for me. Somebody else might not trust them because they might think that they're part of the deep state and trying to steal elections. Somebody else might not trust them because they think they're a bunch of white supremacists rooted in racism. Whatever that mistrust is, the mistrust is obviously there. And we all have different reasons for not trusting them. And they know this. So what they did was they fortified not only the institutions, but literally their walls. They put fencing all around the Capitol, which they're now saying they're wanting to keep permanently. They're actually saying that they want to keep the, here it is right here. This was an article from NBC News saying that they want to keep the permanent fencing around the complex. Says right here, U.S. Capitol needs permanent fencing around complex after deadly riot, acting chief says. Really? Permanent fencing? And we're supposed to be the bastion of democracy here in the United States. We're supposed to be the ones that are displaying what a democratic society looks like all around the world. And yet we're going to put barbed wire fencing around our Capitol building so that you could never protest at the Capitol, no matter what your protest is. This includes Black Lives Matter. That won't be able to happen. You want to protest the fact that you're not getting COVID relief? Not going to happen. You want to do a women's march? Forget it. You want to do a Trump support whoever? You cannot do it. They're making sure of it by putting this barbed wire around the Capitol indefinitely. They're saying right here, the acting chief of U.S. Capitol Police called for permanent fencing around the Capitol building days after she said that the department failed in its efforts to protect the sprawling complex on January 6th when pro-Trump rioters stormed the building. Says, in light of recent events, I can unequivocally say that vast improvements to the physical security infrastructure must be made to include permanent fencing and the availability of ready backup forces in close proximity to the Capitol. Acting Chief Yogananda Pittman said in a statement. And, you know, Democrats are cheering this. Republicans have actually been calling for these structures to be removed. It is all the Republican senators and lawmakers saying, get rid of this. And the Democrats are saying no. Now, why are the Democrats unwilling to get rid of all of this? Because they're afraid of the people coming. And they know that it won't just be a bunch of QAnon conspiracy theorists, that it'll be anybody and everybody who knows that our government is on the take and that our government is no longer working for us. And so they want to have this permanent fencing there. And when they impeached Donald Trump for saying that he incited violence, even though none of his words ever incited violence, if you read his words, never did. And then some people say to me, yeah, but we all know what he wanted. How do you know what he wanted if he didn't say those words? How do you know exactly what he wanted? Did he ever call for it? Did he plan for it? Did he collude with anybody about it? How exactly did this happen? And the people that are sitting there saying, yeah, but, because they are blinded by their hatred of Donald Trump. They're willing to sacrifice all of our rights to protest and make our voices heard. They are willing to throw that away just to stop Donald Trump supporters. And meanwhile, what this is going to do is silence anybody and everybody who has grievance with the government, which is, by the way, almost everybody at this point. So the government knows this, and they wanted to say any powerful person who calls for protest, any powerful person with a platform and a microphone and with a name and a Twitter following who calls for protest of the government, who says these people must be forced to give us pandemic relief. These people must be forced to give us Medicare for all, or these people must be forced to maintain our civil liberties for Second Amendment rights, or whatever your issue might be. If you're somebody with a name, somebody with a platform, somebody with a Twitter account, and you say we must force these people, or we want to fight for our rights and force this fight, call out, push back, any of these words they're going to say, you are now potentially a domestic terrorist. And you are now going to be silenced, and we're going to remove not only you from the internet, but we're going to scrub any and all calls for your protest off the internet as well. No one will show up that day to the protest you've organized, because we've determined that there's a risk of potential violence breaking out, and you are now potentially facing domestic terrorist charges. And it won't matter what the cause is. They'll say, oh, I see. You're for reforming, getting rid of capitalism. You want to ban capitalism. So they will say that is an attack on our country. You're a domestic terrorist. We have to get rid of all your postings. Nobody will show up to your protest because we're going to, for one, make sure that there's barbed wire all over the place, and they're going to be met with National Guard. So this is why they chose to go after Donald Trump for this, and not for what they could have potentially gone after him for. Now, what could they have gone after him for? They could have gone after him for failure to act. He's our commander-in-chief. He was our commander-in-chief at the time. He swore to an oath to protect the country. And after the rioters had breached the Capitol and they were inside, from what we understand, there was a heated conversation between him and Kevin McCarthy. And many Republicans feel that he was slow to act or didn't act at all. The media reported on this. They said, oh, how terrible. Mike Pence was the one who had to call in the National Guard, not Donald Trump. It was Mike Pence who really did it. They could have gone after Donald Trump for not upholding his oath of office of protecting the United States. That when he knew that there was an imminent attack on our nation's capital, he sat there and did nothing. They could have gone after him for that, because that was a direct violation of the oath of office. Now, it is not a part of the oath of office to say, I will never call the government corrupt. I'll never question elections. I'll never call out politicians or call them crooked or corrupt or say bad things about the opposing party. That is not a part of the oath of office. Politicians do that all the time. They point fingers at each other. They sling mud. They say the other one's crooked, corrupt. They need to be removed from office. They're fraudulent. They claim that there's irregularities in the election all the time. We see Democrats have done this for years, saying there's gerrymandering and voter suppression and even some fraud. And they're claiming all of these things. And that is not something that is against the oath of office. You are allowed to use your voice as a lawmaker to call out bad things you think are happening. In fact, we want our lawmakers to do this, right? We want them to show up and say, you know what? There's a lot of corruption around me and we need to fix this. And here's who's doing it. We want them to do this. So that is not a breach of oath of office. Donald Trump did not breach his oath of office when he said he felt like things were fraudulent or crooked or on the take, or he called for protests and he told people to use their voices and either boo or cheer, depending on who the person was. That was not a breach of oath of office, but you could make the case that the oath of office was breached when he did not immediately protect Americans when he learned that Americans were at risk, particularly lawmakers in the Capitol building. He didn't act, and therefore that could have been something that they went after him for. But that wouldn't have been useful to them, you see. They didn't want to go after him for that, because that shows that's of no use to them. Not to mention there's a lot of other questions around that exact allegation that Republicans could have used against Democrats during that impeachment hearing. They could have said, well, why didn't Nancy Pelosi go ahead and authorize the extra reinforcements that were requested of her that she apparently denied? Same thing for Mitch McConnell. He didn't want them to bring that up either, because he's part of the establishment for sure. And Mitch McConnell also denied the reinforcements. Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi did that. But they didn't want, so that's why they didn't want to go after Trump for failure to act, because they also failed to act. And they wouldn't want the finger pointed at them now, would they? No. And not only that, but that isn't useful to them. That isn't useful in keeping the population under control, of quelling unrest and trying to maintain their grip on power as long as possible. That isn't useful. But what is useful is saying, you called for a protest. It turns out that protest got violent. And so now we're going to link your calls for the protest and you speaking at that protest to you now being responsible for that violence. That is something that could be used against all of us. And we should be afraid of that. And we should be aware of that. But they know that the unrest is coming. And what they're doing is doing everything they possibly can to ensure that it never shows up that close to their doorstep again. They want to continue marching forward and ripping us off and being corrupt, or all of the things, whatever it is your beef is with the government. They want to keep on doing whatever all that is that they're doing. And they want to do it in peace and quiet. And if we're mad, we just need to take it out somewhere else, on Facebook, until they silence you, until they remove your posts. In which case, you're just going to have to whisper it in your living rooms. And that's where they would like to keep this. They would like to keep our unrest and our angst and our anger and our discontent with the government as just whispers in our living room.